my name's Tass, and I just wanted to tell you guys a couple of things that I wish I knew going into the med school application cycle. So my intention with this video is not necessarily to give you guys absolute advice. Obviously take everything with a grain of salt that you hear on the internet, but I just wanted to do this quick video so that way I can encourage you guys to do further research before applying, and then also maybe get you started on communicating with any pre-health advisors you may have on campus. A little bit about myself: I recently graduated from UC Riverside with a biology degree. I also graduated from University Honors, and I've already taken my MCAT and I applied to medical school on June 18th. I was verified a month later on AMCAS and about 3 days after I submitted to ACOMA. So the biggest thing that I ran into when beginning the application process was learning when and what type of transcripts to send to the medical schools through AMCAS and ACOMAs. The tricky thing with my situation is that UCR is a quarter system school. That meant that if I wanted to apply June 1st, which is like the ideal date for most medical applicants to actually submit their application, it would have meant that I wouldn't be able to send in my spring quarter transcripts with my entire official transcript set. So the schools that I applied to wouldn't be able to see my spring transcripts right away. After doing some research online and then also talking to my pre-health advisors on campus, I kind of came up with an idea of what to do and how to proceed with my situation. Since my GPA was relatively high and already in the competitive area, I felt that I was able to submit a little bit earlier and sacrifice my spring quarter GPA because my GPA wouldn't have made a difference in my competitiveness for medical school. So that meant that I sent in my application to AMCAS and ACOMAs without med schools seeing my spring transcripts. Again, the reason I did that was because I felt my GPA was competitive enough and my spring quarter grades would not have changed that in any way. There are some cases where students may not have the most competitive GPA and they were really hoping for the spring quarter transcripts to actually make a difference in their GPA, maybe even boost their GPA by like 0.1, which does make a difference. And in those cases, I believe most advisors would advise those students to actually hold off on their application and send their spring transcripts with the entire application. There are some ways around this. If you don't have a competitive GPA and you're waiting for spring transcripts to come out and you want to submit on time, you can just submit and then also request official transcripts from your spring quarter to be sent later on. But do keep in mind that does take a while and can cost more money too. Next thing I want to talk about is the AMCAS application. So I'm sure many of you know, if you're applying to medical school, if you're interested in MD schools, you'll be applying through AMCAS versus ACOMAS, which is for DO schools. I applied to both, but I noticed a couple of differences in the MD schools versus DO school requirements. The first thing that I noticed is that ACOMAS is the DO school application center, doesn't actually include top 3 meaningful experiences. So you don't really get to identify your top 3 meaningful experiences in ACOMAS, nor do you really get a chance to say why these experiences are meaningful to you. The only thing you do have in ACOMAS is your 16 to 17, I believe, extracurricular descriptions. This is why when writing descriptions, it's important to make every single character count. What I've noticed when looking over some descriptions was that even I was at fault of not really getting my message across the way that I wanted to when I was talking about my extracurricular activities. Instead of mentioning in my descriptions what I learned, what the program was, I mainly emphasized what I did. But instead, I really wanted to change it into something more meaningful and convey to the medical schools that each activity really did mean a lot to me. So in my final draft of my description, I finally had everything in order, and what I did include was what the program was, what I did, and finally, the most important, what I learned. So those 3 components will actually make for a better, more compelling description of your activities than just by adding what you did. Obviously, being able to put some emotion into your activities shows med schools that you actually cared about what you did and it wasn't just something that you placed on a resume. The other thing I wanted to mention is going back to the top 3 meaningful experiences thing that I mentioned for AMCAS, I actually noticed that a couple of MD schools really prefer that you have letters of rec for each of those 3 meaningful experiences. Whatever activities you listed for those top 3 meaningful experiences, try your best to procure a strong letter of rec for each of them, maybe from a supervisor or a professor or a PI. Whatever it is pretty helpful to have. I did run into a couple of schools that did require that. I was told about these prerequisites maybe a month out before the process all started, so I really wish I had more time to gather stronger letters of rec when I had the chance to, so I just wanted to give you guys a heads up now to do your research on what your medical schools do require. The thing I really wanted to get into was Casper. Casper is a recently developed secondary test that some schools actually require medical school applicants to take now. It differs from the MCAT in the sense that it doesn't test your academic ability, but more so your ability to deal with conflict and ethical values. Most of the scenarios that Casper provides are not in a medical setting. Instead, it takes place in social settings, so between friends, or even in professional settings between coworkers. These situations typically deal with conflict of interest, moral values, moral obligations, and the safety of others even. Now, what Casper emphasizes is that they are immune to studying, so that means that studying is not one way to pass the test. However, I tend to disagree with that. When I first found out about Casper, I wasn't really expecting so many of my med schools to actually require the test. When studying for it, I realized how difficult it would be, but it's not impossible. I'll do a more thorough video on how I actually ended up studying for Casper, because I do believe there were ways for me to prepare for the test and have an idea of what a good answer would be. For now, all I wanted to say was just make sure to do your research and see if any of the med schools you're interested in applying to actually require Casper. It's become increasingly existent in medical school requirements, and I wouldn't be surprised if more medical schools require it later on. Additionally, with Casper, you want to make sure that you take the test as soon as you can, because it does take about 3 weeks to grade. So even though your application may be ready and you already have your secondary sent to you by the particular school that requires Casper, schools might actually end up waiting to offer you an interview until your Casper scores are sent. So just be sure to have everything ready to go. That's basically what I had planned for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm still in the middle of applying to medical school right now, so I'm sure I'm going to find out a lot of things I wish I had known before going into the process. So there might even be an addendum to this video later on. Like I said, please look forward to my next video on how to study for Casper, and I'll see you guys next time.